Hi everyone. In this video we're going to look at the Staunton Gambit in the Dutch defense. So the Dutch defense is d4, f5, and right away black is aiming for a fight. He imbalances the position. He's controlling the e4 square, stopping white from pushing his pawn and getting the dual pawn center. So it's a very fighting opening. Black is not going to settle for a draw. Now, I don't know a lot about the Dutch defense, so I need a repertoire against it. And as white, I've chosen the Staunton Gambit because it's a reputable gambit that immediately puts the control into my hands. It doesn't allow a lot of possible different defenses for black. So less theory is the aim here until I learn more lines. So e4 is the Staunton Gambit, giving up this e pawn. And there's nothing better than to take the pawn, accept the gambit. If black tries to decline it, for example, maybe he'll play the move d6 to guard his f-pawn with his light squared bishop, then just develop sensibly and start protecting your e4 pawn. Like, for example, knight c3. You don't want to take the f-pawn here and just help black develop. So you protect e4, he might attack it again, you can defend it again, and so forth. Okay, but we won't concentrate on that. We'll look at the lines where black accepts the gambit. Now here we will play knight to c3 to attack that pawn, try to win it back. And there are a couple of ways black might attempt to defend the pawn. One mistake is d5, which looks really solid. But it's a mistake because there is the fork, queen to h5 check, g6, queen takes d5. So we already got the pawn back, and the pawn on e4 is really weak. We'll probably win that one too. All right, so going back, the better way to protect this gambit pawn on e4 is knight to f6. That's the normal move. And for a long time, players used to play f3 in this position and make it a true gambit. Black takes the f-pawn, and then knight takes f3. But after f3 is played, black doesn't have to accept that pawn. He can play d5 at that point. And because of that, I think a better attempt at an advantage, and currently the main line, is to play bishop to g5. And the intent is just to remove the defender of the e4 pawn and then take it. So black has to do something about that. And I think the main line move here, the strongest move, is knight to c6. Black puts pressure on the d-pawn. In fact, in the Staunton Gambit, black needs to constantly put pressure on white's center in order to get counterplay. But before we look at that main move, let's look at a couple of alternatives. Sometimes players may play e6, which I think is a little passive. Just take the pawn. Bishop d7 is the point of e6, breaking the pin. Now, I recommend taking that knight with your bishop because this knight on e4 is going to become a monster in this position. Just play like this, and that knight on e4 cannot be easily challenged. You just removed the only piece that was challenging it. Black doesn't want to push his pawn to d5. He'll create a hole on e5 and a backward e-pawn. So that knight is powerful in this position. And white has more space because of his pawn pushed to d4. So I prefer white in that position. So going back here, e6 probably is too passive. Another move you'll sometimes see is c6. And the intent there is to support the pawn push to d5 to solidify the e4 pawn. Now, in this case, I think the move f3 is warranted. Okay, you're ready to make this move in this case and just give up a pawn and really gambit a pawn. Black may take that pawn and accept it, and you'll just get really quick development, starting with knight takes f3. Probably d5 will be played to open up the light squared bishop and stake a claim in the center here. Bishop to d3 is a sensible developing move. Bishop to g4 is probably the most powerful way to play for black, pinning that knight, influencing the center. So here I recommend trying to grab the bishop pair, play h3, and if black trades it off, you get a nice queen developed to f3. Knight bd7 is a good developing move. I recommend castling long here. And yes, white is down a pawn, but he has superior development and more space. I actually prefer white slightly in this position. Going back, after you play f3, if black doesn't accept that pawn on f3, he may instead play d5. Well, then play f takes e4, break up his center, and then perhaps d takes e4 will be played, and then I recommend bishop to c4 here. Just develop that pawn on e4 is weak. We can round that up later. We're down a pawn, but we got these double pawns here on the e file that are very weak to attack, and we have an initiative and we have better development. So again, I prefer white. Okay, so let's go back to the main fourth move for black, which is knight c6. All right, we will push our pawn to d5 to harass that knight, and it's forced to move to e5. There's no better square. Queen to e2 I recommend to get ready to castle long and pressure that e4 pawn. And now there are a lot of different moves black can make, but we're going to follow just one of the possibilities here, which I'll consider the main line. c6, I think that's the best attempt by black. You have to challenge the center, as I said earlier. You cannot play passively as black. So we will see what we can do against that move, c6. Well, we'll continue our development, castling, putting the rook on the d file to protect our d pawn. C takes d5, and we're currently down 2 pawns, but we will recover one right away with knight takes d5, which is supported by our rook. Now we'll follow, again, just one example line here. If e6 is played to attack the knight and drive it out of the center, you could play it back to c3 and then try to win the e4 pawn. But I recommend playing knight takes f6 there, and then g takes f6. And even though the bishop is under attack, you can win that e pawn right now with the queen. Because if f takes g5, you have queen takes the knight, recovering the material and hitting the rook in the corner on h8, by the way. So perhaps here, instead of taking your bishop, black might try bishop to g7. So that really is now a threat to take your bishop because the bishop will be protecting the knight. So we have to move the bishop now, and I recommend putting it on e3. All right, and the engine does like this position for white. We will stop here. White is better developed. His king is safer. Black doesn't really have a good pawn cover for his king on either side of the board. So I do prefer white. All right, if you look at the description below this video, you'll see a link to this very page I'm using here, and you can run through my analysis and play through these moves again. And if you'd like to practice this very repertoire that I'm recommending in the Staunton Gambit, then I have 6 different practice chapters. What you do is you click on one of them, and let's see, is it working? Okay, here's one of the chapters. Click on one of them and you will see it tell you to play the white side of the Dutch Defense Staunton Gambit. And just play the moves that I recommended throughout the video if you're interested in that particular repertoire, and it will tell you if you're correct or not. And so here's the Staunton Gambit move, and these 6 different practice chapters run through different variations. All right, well, thanks for watching the video. I hope you learned something. I sure did. I'll see you for the next video.